falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm Podcast.
Hey folks, welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio, the interview show from Brainstorm where we talk to a variety of folks with the intent to spread critical thinking, compassion, and skepticism. My guest this week is Karen Garst, author of Women Beyond Belief and a new book, Women v. Religion. Karen is one of my favorite guests. She just seems to enjoy talking to people so much that I can't help but smile when I'm talking to her. I've had a chance to read some of the new book and we talk about it in this interview. So I'll say now that it's a good one and I highly recommend you get yourself a copy. We talk a little bit in this interview about Mythcon and her reasons for going. And we talk a little bit about Wendy Marsman, who left the atheist community not that long ago and whose departure from our little community made me disappointed in the way men treat women in the movement. Yeah. Beyond those notes, there's not much to say, except I hope you enjoy the interview.
Hi, this is Trav Mamone, host of the By Any Means podcast. Join me every week as I interview bloggers, podcasters, writers, and activists about the intersections of atheism, humanism, racial justice, feminism, LGBTQ rights, and other social issues. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher, and you can read my blog at freethoughtblogs.com/byanymeans. And remember, that's bi spelled B-I. Come take a listen to the musings of a queer humanist because, hey, aren't we all a little bi-curious?
All right, I'm going to welcome to the Skeptic Studio today, Karen Garst, author of Women v. Religion. So, how you been since the last time you were on our show?
Oh, I've been great.
That's awesome.
I've been great. Yep. I've written another book since I was on your show with Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. You would think a retired person would retire, but I keep getting angry, so I write.
Yeah, what else can you do, eh?
There you go.
Yeah, I think retirement means retirement for people who kind of don't have anything to be passionate about.
There you go. Well, we just moved to a small town in Oregon called Silverton, and I'm involved in a lot of stuff in the community too. My husband is as well. So I've got, let me see, 4 evening meetings this week.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Well.
No, it keeps you busy. It's nice to do. So I guess a good place to start would be with the new book. What is Women v. Religion?
Well, what happened after I wrote the first book, I had never really been involved in either national, state, or local secular groups. When my husband and I left church, we just slept in on Sundays. And that was quite some time ago. So when I wrote the first book, I decided I needed to reach out a little, and I happened to be Women in Secularism conference. And they haven't had one since. This was a couple of years ago. And I just met an astounding number of women. It really was eye-opening to me about how there are some very active women atheists and who write. And I said, got to do another book. So I solicited several people at that conference who were very interested. Kaylin Marguerite Whalen was there, Hypatia Alexandra, and a few others. So what I decided to do in the second book, different from the first book is really personal stories. There are 22 women in that book who talk about their own particularly private journey away from religion. This book, and I don't want to use the word academic because that, people will go, I'm out of college. I can't do that anymore. But I mean that in the sense of it's not just personal stories. It's looking at women and how religion has treated them from a number of different perspectives. First, there's the issue of race. So I have 2 African-American women who talk about what it was like for women in Africa and then transitioning to slavery and losing the divine feminine, queens who were women, etc. So kind of the double whammy.
Wow.
And the Hispanic, 2 Hispanic women write about the particular community they have and how tight the structure of the community is and how closely tied it is to religion. And we all know when you leave religion, you're kind of giving up part of your community. And for some people, you're giving up all your community.
Yeah.
And then I have a woman who's transgender who talks about that area, which is, in my opinion, is clearly the toughest, particularly since somebody got elected in 2016.
Somebody who shall not be named.
Yeah. But then I have Candace Gorham's a mental health counselor, and she talks about this issue of shame and guilt. And Alexis Record, who was raised with the Accelerated Christian Education Program, which is a total joke, talks about childhood indoctrination. So, there's also somebody who's ex-Jewish, Valerie Tirico, absolutely nails the Bible. She goes through everything in the Bible. And then we also have Aruna Papp, who... Can you imagine being a young girl in India and looking next door and seeing another girl lit on fire?
Oh, geez. Wow.
And killed. What does that teach you about your worth as a woman in society? And she has done a marvelous job. She was forced into marriage. She comes to Canada. She lives near Toronto and has got a divorce, married another man. But she talks about the help she's giving to this Southeast Asian community and her own journey of what it took to get free from that. But I can't imagine anything more heartbreaking than watching an honor killing.
No, yeah, that would be pretty intense.
And then just to add some light fare, Abby Hafer writes about biology, and it's really funny. Like if you think there's an intelligent designer, you haven't seen the woman's body.
Right.
No. What happened is we started to walk upright, which sounded like a great idea. Would have our hands free. Good. Yeah. But as you walk upright, you need a narrow pelvis. And then what else happened? Oh, your brain expands because we're getting more intelligent. Uh-oh, bigger brain, smaller pelvis. And that's why our children are so dependent on us for the first few years, because we have to birth them early.
Right.
And if God had been an intelligent designer, he would have made us like kangaroos. Would that be cool? You get the little thing, it comes out, it doesn't hurt, you don't need an epidural, bam, and it goes into this pouch.
Right.
Hey. But alas. And then another Canadian, Greta Vosper.
Oh, yeah.
You must know about her, writes about being an atheist minister.
Yeah, we interviewed her, well, it's quite a while ago now, but maybe 2 years almost. But
yeah, I think the church is having a little trouble kicking her out.
Yeah.
So it's just a wide array of essays on different subjects. Most of these women have written books, so it's very well done. It's very well referenced. One of the things I'm trying to do, in fact, I just finished an email, is to see if women's studies programs, and I'm concentrating on the United States right now, would use it, not as a textbook per se, but, an independent study, an assignment in class. And I still don't understand why I'm not getting more responses. I've got a few people I sent the manuscript to and are considering it, but how do you teach women's studies and not talk about religion? Can you answer that one?
Yeah, that seems like the way women are treated is almost, you can't separate it from religion at least in any society I know of.
Exactly. I've been watching, I'm going to give a plug for a PBS show called Home Fires.
Okay.
And it takes place right at the beginning of World War II in Britain. And it's nice to watch something where there's no cell phones and no computers. It's very calming, but it's incredibly well done. And you look at what women had to deal with there, and the inability to leave a husband who was violent because you really didn't have a choice. What were you going to do? You had no money. You couldn't get a job. You would be kind of shunned by the community because divorce was very uncommon at that time.
Right.
And it's just a generation. It's my mother's generation. That's only one generation removed. And I look at it and I go, oh, I'm so glad I was born later.
Right.
And we have come a long way. I think of my mom who told her dad she wanted to go to college to be an artist. And he said, no, you're going to be a teacher.
Oh, right. Jeez.
And so she did that and she taught. And it wasn't really until her last child, moi, went away to college that she took up painting and loved it and spent the rest of her life doing these wonderful landscapes and different things like that. But she had to suppress that desire, that passion, pretty much her whole life.
Right, because she was set on this other path because she was told to, eh?
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't her choice of what she studied in school. It was her father's.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the role religion plays in that. I was writing this email to a chair of one of the colleges, and how can you be in a church on Sunday with a book that treats women as property, certainly in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament says, well, obey your husbands. How can you not look at that and see its impact on gender equality?
Right, yeah.
And I often say religion is the last cultural barrier to gender equality. We are not going to be like Norway and Sweden until we get less religious. We're not going to have, the maternity, paternity leave. We're not going to have a stop to the constant barrage on reproductive rights, the constant discussion about abortion. I mean, even Ireland voted for abortion. Ireland, Catholic Ireland.
Right.
And yet we still have proposals to defund Planned Parenthood, even though they don't provide abortion with federal dollars. We see clinics closing, being required to be affiliated with a hospital, constant attacks on reproductive rights.
Brutal. Yeah, I mean, obviously religion plays a huge role in a lot of this. Do you think that people will be able to cast off this misogynist type mentality, even if we do get rid of religion?
Oh, I think so. I think you've seen some things this year. The Me Too movement has radically changed the public conversation about sexual harassment.
That's true.
And the number of people in the United States, I don't know what impact it's had in Canada, but in the United States, the number of people who have had to resign or been sued or can't run for office anymore because it's public knowledge is really amazing. And of course, there's always this pushback about, well, what is really sexual harassment? And, catcalls are okay, et cetera. But most people would agree that, having sex with your boss to get ahead in the job is not okay. And being made to have sex to get a role in a movie is not okay.
Yeah.
So if we get that conversation, I don't think would have happened 10 years ago.
Right.
So that's the type of conversation that brings us back to consider the fundamental status of women and whether they're going to be equal in our society or not. Plus, the number of women who have decided to run for office in the United States is really amazing. Yeah. They're not all Democrats. Most are Democrats, but they're Republicans as well. And once you get, I would say, even like 40% of our Congress being women, you're going to see a sea change.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I've noticed an odd type of Republican movement, where they're trying to claim the name of feminism, which I guess speaks to the effectiveness of the movement.
Certainly. If you're trying to glom onto something, you're scared. and you're doing something. And they're seeing that a lot of these women who are running are Democrats. And you know what's interesting to me is I did a blog post on this kind of when I first started my blog a couple years ago, but I was tracing the history of abortion and learned that in the 19th century, in the early 19th century, again, this is U.S. specific, that the Catholic Church allowed abortion up until what was called quickening, which is when you can feel the fetus. So it's 24 weeks, something like that.
Okay.
20 weeks, something like that. And it wasn't until 1848 where they disallowed it. And at that time, there were abortionists, women mostly, who put ads in papers, come here, et cetera, et cetera. And then the American Medical Association came along. And, there's always been this battle between the midwives and the healers.
Right.
One of the ways of kind of taking over that and getting rid of those women who performed abortion was to, essentially make it illegal. So that formation of the American Medical Association had a big impact. And then during the Depression, there was more abortion because people were more sympathetic. I think they did a poll of interns and 60 residents or something like that and said, medical residents said 63% would support giving an abortion. And then you get to the 50s, 60s, et cetera. Well, what happened in one of these races was there was a Democrat, I think it was Iowa, but don't quote me on that one, was running for office and was kind of a shoo-in. And the Republican Party said, look, let's get the churches to leaflet about the issue of abortion, how bad abortion is. And they flipped the seat. And so what they found was this was kind of a wedge strategy to get in the Democratic Catholic women to have them leave. That, coupled with civil rights, really changed the southern part of the United States from Democrat to Republican. And there was a really cool quote that when the moral majority was formed, Jerry Falwell wouldn't have known how to spell abortion. But it became a wedge strategy. There's actually a document called the wedge strategy where they used it. So they weren't using it because of a philosophical issue. It wasn't even it was a religious issue at the time, but they used it for political purposes. And they're still milking that today. But if Republican women start to turn on that, the Republican Party is going to have to switch as well. I don't think they're going to be able to maintain that very long. If you saw the vote in Ireland, I mean, it was amazingly in support of allowing safe, affordable abortions. And there will always be abortions. I remember in college, it was a Lutheran college, so that might have had something to do with it there, But we put an ad, it was in late 60s, put an ad for New York abortion, and they impounded all the newsletters and wouldn't let them go out to the students. But I think it's going to change. I think we're a long way from Iceland, who is like number one in gender equality. They have paternity leave, they have maternity leave, they have health insurance, they have all of those things that really, frankly, make it easier for women to work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It evens the playing field in a very real way for both genders by putting men, like, kind of almost subverting some of these ideal or not ideal, these roles that people have put men and women into.
Exactly. And, culture takes a long time to change. I was invited to, you've probably heard about Mythicist Milwaukee, Mythcon. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Well, last year when I went, and I was invited, I was given a free pass if I publicized it on my blog. Sargon of Akkad debated Thomas Smith on the issue of feminism. And so I was the first one, and I got up and said, I'm the faithless feminist. My goal is to get women to leave religion. It's not going to happen with two men debating feminism. So, of course, this spring I got a call. And Karen, would you be willing to? Well, I couldn't say no. It would have been too hypocritical. So what turns out is I am having a debate about gender equality with Karen Strawn, who's Canadian. Let's bring it back to Canada. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's a men's rights activist.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure you know her.
I've heard the name. I haven't followed her stuff, though.
Well, it's kind of interesting. So what I did was I went back and read Warren Farrell's book, The Myth of Male Power. And it's very interesting. One of the things he doesn't do, however, he doesn't blame women. And he was very active in the National Organization of Women movement, etc. But what it has done for me, I'm more attuned to certain things. Like if I go to the grocery store and I see men with kids alone without the mother there, I go, yay. You know, that's different. I never would have seen that growing up. I don't think my father ever went grocery shopping.
Right.
So it's kind of made me a little more attuned to some of those things. So things are changing. Things are changing, but culture takes a long time.
I remember I took my kids to the doctor's office one time, and there was a couple that was probably in their, I want to say late 60s, and they were looking at us, and it's good to see a dad taking his kids to the doctor. Times are sure changing, they said. Exactly.
And one of the things that's need to change is religion. So this is probably going to be my last book, Women versus Religion, the case against faith and for freedom.
There you go.
But it really is a way to look at religion from all different perspectives and their impact on women. I don't think there's anything else out there like it. If you look at the 100 bestsellers on Amazon, guess how many atheism books are written by women?
Oh, probably none.
No, 5 or 6.
Okay.
5 or 6. So it's nice to have something out there. Last Saturday, I was number 1 and number 2, the Kindle and the paperback on hot new releases in atheism. I had the best weekend I've ever had.
I bet.
But, it's kind of hard to get the word out. I really appreciate being on your podcast. On my first book, I was on 50. You have no idea how many of those aren't there anymore.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of pod fading going on the last couple of years.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's the topic or if new people are coming on and I just don't have them on my list yet. But it's hard to maintain that kind of volunteer activity for over 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Whether it's a blog or a podcast or anything. And I'm hoping that, the new people will come on and take over. And, but we definitely need more conversation about women and religion because women are the one who are oppressed. I mean, they're the ones who are subjugated in the Bible. It's not men. And to say, I did a post this week at www.faithlessfeminist.com. She makes another plug, called Is God a Man? Well, yeah.
That seems obvious.
Yeah. And somebody did write me about, in the Jewish religion, more in the Kabbalah, the secondary writings. I got that word wrong. No, I think that's right. Anyway, the secondary writings than in the Bible itself, although there's some words there that could mean female. Think of what the loss it was when you had a goddess, when you had a queen, when you had a female deity to look up to. They have, the archaeologists in Israel have found these little figurines from like the 6th to 8th century BCE all over. And I had a chance to see them in the British Museum a couple of years ago, and they're like 2 inches. But, you put them in a little curved space, I imagine, little shelf in the house, and there's a candle there, and, you're having a bad day, and you go, Mother Divine, Mother Goddess, please make it better for me. And then all that's taken away. No, we're not going to have any female divine anymore. It's just going to be men. And the impact that has. And you don't even realize the impact it has psychologically.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, I guess I don't know that, because I'm not in that position where I lost something like that, but it seems like it could be pretty traumatic in a sense.
Well, exactly. And let me see if I can just pull here from one of these. Oh, the other thing I had in the book, let me just digress a little, is an ex-Muslim. and I was not able to get somebody for my first book. So she is very interesting. But did you know, prior to Muhammad, that there were queens? There was Zabibi, who was an Assyrian queen, Nabatean Empress Julia. There were women warriors who waged war, even one, Hint bin Utbah, who waged war against Muhammad. There were female deities like Alat and Manat. So you think of how constrained Islam is for women. They had, right before Muhammad, all of these role models and images. And I don't think we can neglect how important those role models and images are and how much they impact us. I remember when I was growing up, and I've talked to my sister a lot about this. Do you want to be a nurse, a teacher, or secretary? And it wasn't like I couldn't have done something else, but it just was natural.
Right.
And today, little girls see astronauts and physicists and everything else. So part of it is, that role model of what women can do. And when you eliminate the feminine divine, it does have an impact. It definitely has an impact.
Right. It almost makes it seem like, well, I mean, it's like representation in anything, right? Like pop culture, even if you don't see examples of what you can achieve, then you don't even necessarily think that it's an option.
Exactly. And I may have mentioned this before, but in my 9th grade science class, we learned about evolution, and I wrote a paper on early hominids, and I was fascinated by it. And I think with just a little encouragement or somebody giving me Margaret Mead's book, I still today watch tons of documentary, read books because I'm fascinated by it. And I would have been passionate as an anthropologist.
Right.
But it never occurred to me. My parents would have been real supportive. I don't see a problem there, but it never occurred to me because I never saw anybody like that. I never saw that as a possibility. So that's one of the things religion does is just squashes your vision of what women can be.
Yeah. Yeah. By actively removing them from these positions, I suppose. Or
portraying them as dirty, unclean. Right. If you look at the tableau, Elizabeth Cady Stanton says something about, take away the snake, take away the tree, etc. All of those were images of the goddess. The tree represented Asherah, who was a Canaanite goddess. And the snake was always associated with the female divine because of its rejuvenation. And this was kind of a mother goddess thing, the earth rejuvenates, continues, etc. So this was Genesis story was done on purpose. It was to take all the symbols for goddesses and put them down and make them bad and blame the woman. That was not happenstance. That was done on purpose. Now, did it copy other things? It sure did, because in Babylonia, there's a myth called Enuma Elish, where the top god, Marduk, decides that he's going to ask his fellow gods, can he be top god if he kills Tiamat, who is the female goddess? Right. And they go, yeah, sure, go ahead, we'll go along with you. And he cuts her up and then makes the sky and the earth. Where have I heard that before? So there were a lot of influences around, the Hebrews that caused them to write certain things. But no one will convince me that tableau in Genesis is not a specific attempt to put down all the symbols that the goddess had.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense that it would if they felt that men were going to wanted that power and felt they had to take it from the women.
Exactly. And the same thing occurred, as we talked a little bit about, in Africa. There were queens, there were goddesses, and they got totally eliminated. So when an African-American woman, a woman from Africa was made a slave, she wasn't only enslaved as a person, she was also told, worship this male god. So she lost two big things, freedom and the feminine divine at the same time. So it was a double blow. Right. And they do a really nice, these two women, Valerie Wade and Deanna Adams, go through, there's two parts. One is Africa to Jim Crow and then Jim Crow forward. So they really cover the status of African American women from Africa to today very, very well. It's an interesting history.
So, I suppose some of these different cultural things, these are also in different chapters of your new book?
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it looks at, I picked people who were specialists in a certain area. It starts out with a woman, Candace Gorham, who's a mental health counselor. So she talks about shame, guilt, the impact on our mental psyche from religion and the impact on women.
Wow.
And then we just go through, as I said earlier, childhood indoctrination, African Americans, ex-Jewish, ex-Muslim, transgender. So I just don't know where else you would find that many perspectives about the harm religion causes to women and clamps down on their freedom. In another book, you'd have to read, 13 books about it.
Sounds almost like something that, well, you said you were trying to farm it out to women's studies courses, but what about like religious studies courses?
Well, that's an idea that maybe I should try that.
I don't know. It seems like it would be relevant to that field of study. I don't know.
Yeah, I met a religion professor in Portland a few weeks ago, and I'm going to sit down and talk with him. And he's probably not very religious, but he's been doing this a long time. And that is, I'm going to explore that with him.
Yeah, religious studies professors often aren't very religious, I find.
Well, it's interesting. When I was at this Lutheran college, we took a class. We had to take a religion class each year, and my 101 class talked about the different oral strains of the Old Testament.
Oh, neat.
I never heard about that, but God had different names. He had Elohim, which is kind of the plural of El, which was a Canaanite god.
Okay.
And then you have Yahweh, which was kind of the first edition, if you will, Priestly, and Deuteronomy. And Priestly, I think, was the last where they went in and edited. Now, I would not give the editor a very good grade because they left in 2 stories of the Exodus. They left in 2 stories of creation. I think they were a little nervous about cutting it out. So they just kind of added to what other people have said, but wouldn't get an A in my class of editing,
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to hear, this was 1968, to hear that at a Lutheran college.
Right.
And in a later course, I did a paper on the book called Gay World, and I learned all about gays, and I gave a presentation in my class.
Interesting.
So it was pretty liberal, even if they didn't let us publish the newsletter with the abortion ad in it.
Right. For a Lutheran college.
Yeah, for a Lutheran college there, it wasn't too bad. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess you mentioned Mythcon and your upcoming debate. What is this debate actually going to be about?
Gender equality. The question is, have women achieved gender equality in the United States? And I say no, and she says yes. And I've been listening to her podcast, and sometimes she just, she said that women in the United States should not have had the right to vote because they didn't fight in the Revolutionary War.
What?
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, they weren't allowed to fight in the Revolutionary War, although some did and dressed up as men and went to fight.
Yep, that's true.
But it really ignores the fact that war affects everybody. You don't think the woman who lost 5 sons when one ship sank in World War II suffered?
Right.
I mean, really.
Just because she didn't go over and fight herself doesn't mean she didn't suffer.
Yeah. I mean, women lost sons. They lost brothers. They lost husbands. To me, that counts for a lot. Plus, all the women here who engaged in the war effort, and, Rosie the Riveter. And I learned the other day that in the United States, when they, during World War II, when they didn't have enough men workers and open to women, they put child care facilities in the factory.
Oh, geez.
To meet the need. And guess what happened when the war was over?
They shut them all down.
Yeah. And,
jeez.
Yeah, there's this movie called Rosie the Riveter, and she says, all I wanted to do was keep welding. I loved it. And of course, she couldn't get a job.
Of course.
Doing it. It was just necessity. But see, they realized they needed to provide childcare services if women were going to work.
Yeah.
And, now we're fighting for that again.
It just seems so obvious. I don't know.
Well, exactly. And, this Warren Farrell I talked about, who wrote this Myth of Male Power, talked about fatherhood. And it is crucial. I think it's very important for children. I respect women who decide to have children alone, but the numbers are just huge. And it's a lot of work raising a child. Mm-hmm. And, whether it's a heterosexual or gay couple or whatever, but it really takes two.
Right.
To be able, I can't imagine raising our son alone. Oh my God, I can't imagine doing it. But that father figure is important both to daughters and to sons.
So I guess obviously I disagree with many of the speakers they had at Mythcon last year. Mm-hmm. What is the lineup like this year? Is this going to be another one of these, what we would consider like a shitlord con, or is this a better lineup this year?
Well, I think what they've learned is they need moderators. In that Sargon, Thomas Smith, there wasn't, and they ended up shouting each other. And I haven't talked to Karen Strong, and Melissa Chen is going to be our moderator. But, I have some bottom lines. I don't want to be interrupted.
Right.
I hate those TV shows, those news shows where they have 5 people talking at the same time.
Yeah, all the pundits that constantly bicker over each other. You can't
understand anything. So that's kind of one of my rules. Let me finish my sentence.
Yeah.
And the mediator can hold up her hand and say stop if she wants me to, and I will obey that. I don't want to be interrupted. But we'll see. I think adding the moderators will help a great deal. There's some of the same people coming back. So we'll see. A friend of mine, Peter Boghossian, who's a philosophy professor, and he wrote a manual for creating atheists. He and I think, I want to say James Lindsay and someone else are going to talk about intersectionality, and they're having a really tough time getting somebody on, quote, the other side,
right,
talking about it because people shy away. But to me, I would rather talk to a room full of people who disagree with me than a room full of people who agree with me.
Yeah.
Because if you want to educate people and you want to have a conversation, it's far more fascinating to have a conversation with people who disagree with you.
I wonder if people are worried that they're not actually engaging in good faith. Like Lindsay and Boghossian have a reputation that they've established, and I feel like it's deserved in large part by engaging in bad faith in some ways. And maybe the people they're approaching just aren't ready for that risk kind of thing. Yeah.
I went to, Peter had a conversation. It wasn't a debate, a conversation with Sargon of Akkad. And there were this was at Portland State University a couple weeks ago, and there were maybe 200 or 300, mostly men.
Right.
Mostly young men. And they had a very, I thought, intelligent conversation. One of the things they said is, we couldn't even talk about fatherhood. And I'm going,
why?
Why? Yeah. Because here's an opportunity to educate people about how important it is to have a father in the child's life. And if you go take a job and you're working 90 hours a week, you're not going to be there for your child.
Right.
So when you look at your career path and when you decide what you want to do and you say, I want to be married someday and have kids, maybe I should do something that would accommodate that. Maybe when I look at a company, I should ask about that. And sure, when you start out on your career, you end up working more than later on. But, you can't complain about fathers not getting custody of their kids when they spend 90 hours at work and never see him.
Right.
Like, hello, who's been raising the children?
Yeah, if you thrust women into the caregiver role, then you can't be surprised that in court, she's given the caregiver role.
Exactly. And, we're so influenced by our culture to think the judicial system is not going to be influenced by that.
Right.
Everybody has in their head kind of what they think, and that most people over 40 who are judges are going to have an image of their mom staying home with them.
Yeah.
And if you just said, take the child away from their mom, they're going to have a visceral reaction to that. I don't care what the facts of the case are. I mean, they try to be neutral and they try to make those decisions, but we're all influenced by how we were raised, what we learned when we were growing up. And it takes a while to change that. Now the next generation of judges, mom was working.
Right. So there's maybe going to be more balance there.
Yeah. And, and it's a bit of what's that called? Not a straw man, but, most divorces are settled by the people themselves. The biggest next chunk is settled by mediation. The ones that go to the court are very contentious.
Right.
And who knows?
Yeah. And I mean, they are a percentage of divorces, but probably not a huge percentage.
Very small.
So like the number of cases where courts are deciding that the mother gets full custody, that's pretty rare.
Yeah. And you've heard of incels, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody has it at this point, right?
Okay. I would think so, but you never know. Probably not in Silverton. If I did a poll in Silverton, I bet they wouldn't, but particularly in Canada, where the person who ran over the people on the street had that on his Facebook or Twitter feed or something like that. But there's nothing that promises you that you're going to fall in love.
Right.
There's nothing that promises you're going to end up in a happy marriage. It's like anything else. You got to work at it, and right now you've got a lot of millennials, women in particular, they want to get a job. They want to have a career. They want to, they want to have it all. It's like the sense of freedom. So you're going to have to adapt and change too, and if you think you're going to get the Hollywood star, you're not, give that up.
Yeah.
If you're going to look on, the Hollywood magazine that's in the grocery store and say, boy, I would really like to have her. You can dream. That's good. But
fantasies are a thing, but
yeah, I mean, I weighed 90 pounds in high school at 5'7". I was really skinny. I made my own clothes and my mother did my hair. Okay. You got the picture. So if you think I thought for 1 minute, but that the head of the football team was going to invite me out, no, I didn't think that, I'm going to my 50th this year. It'll be interesting to see him, but never had that expectation.
It's interesting. There seems to be almost a sense of like a lack of disappointment in their lives beforehand or something. Like, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
When I was growing up, like there was, like you say, like I didn't imagine that I'd be, dating the hot cheerleader or whatever, the head cheerleader or anything like that. Like I was just, a skinny dude who, kind of just lived and like I didn't expect anybody to want to, nobody owed me themselves.
Yeah, that's right. You're not owed a great relationship. It's unfortunate and you have to work at it and you have to be open. And if you are somebody who says, well, nobody wants me, that is not an attitude that's going to get you anybody.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. I do think the one thing that harmed me was a total lack of sexual education.
Right.
Zero. I even asked my mother why the llamas were riding piggyback at the zoo, and she wouldn't tell me. Now, you'd think she could have told me that, right?
At least something about it, eh?
So I thought, you had to be married before you slept with somebody.
Right.
And I even had it, even at Concordia, conservative Concordia, I had a couple of women say, we don't want you to live with us next year because you don't think it's okay to have sex with a guy. And we do. And I think they even went and talked to the pastor or the dean or something like that.
Really?
Yeah. And I said, well, okay, fine, I'll do something else. But even back in the 60s, I was really impacted by that.
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest harms religion has, is to this chastity issue and to see sex as not natural.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you go back and understand why it was there, once we had private property, that man wanted to pass it on to his son. And
Right.
if his wife wasn't a virgin when she was married, he wasn't sure. What if she had a kid within,
Right.
you know, was it his kid? Was it somebody else's kid? And then adultery was punished for women, not men, because men could have multiple wives. But again, that man wanted to know the woman was having his child.
Yeah.
So, you know, I always say it was downhill after agriculture.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting because I think a lot of people get hung up on this idea that monogamy and the single relationship is the normal way that society should run, or like that this is the way that human beings work. And it just seems more and more, the more I learn anyway about other cultures and different societies, it seems clear that that's not necessarily the right way or the way that we're ever going to work properly.
Well, and you look at Iceland, it's almost like, in a way, going back to the Paleolithic and the hunter-gatherers. You know, people are coming together and raising kids together in a I don't want to say commune because that says hippie
Right.
60s and dates myself terribly, but they are coming together to share things like cooking and dining. And can you take my kids today in a like a mini village where there's houses and then there's a central area for dining and things like that.
Right.
We even in Silverton have a little thing like that going on where they're going to build 7 houses with a central dining area. I think they're going to be kitchens in the houses, but it's something like, gee, if you want a big crowd, you don't have to have a big house. Use this area. And sharing things and having somebody close who's a neighbor working together. We've gone, you know, one of the issues I'm involved in Silverton is homeless.
Right.
And I had a group at my house Sunday night to talk about kind of compromising between the proposal to put it in the church backyard and then the neighbors being opposed. But I did feel, you know, I'm up here in the homeowners association in a big house, and, you know, I got to be careful what I say, because I kind of feel like, boy, did I really need this big of a house? You know, could I shrink it now and give it, you know, to somebody else? And
Right.
people who, through many times no fault of their own, end up homeless. It's, but I think we've got some good ideas, and I think we're going to move forward and be able to deal with the people who have, you know, been in Silverton their whole lives and find themselves homeless. So
Right.
it's exciting to be involved in local issues.
For sure. Yeah. Actually, I just listened to an episode of Ezra Levant, or not Ezra Levant, wrong guy, Ezra Klein's podcast, and different political sides too. And he was talking to some people who were involved in local politics, and they would travel around the country and get to know the local politics. And they said, like, there's a lot more cooperation between people on local levels, where you see all this division online and on the federal level. But when people are getting together and dealing with things with their neighbors, it's a whole different story.
Well, and we have this thing called, I don't know if you have it up there, called Nextdoor. And it's a social media program where you can kind of talk to your neighbors. And like most social media programs, it's a problem. You need to be face to face. I mean, we had this great conversation Sunday night by people who were in favor of the pods and people who were residents who were concerned about being in their neighborhood. We decided to move forward and have other small group meetings face to face, kind of like going back to the way it used to be, you know?
Right.
So it's always think globally, act locally. We also have an effort to do clean energy.
Okay.
And you kind of feel like if you take it on nationally, wow, you're just this little itty bitty cog in a wheel. But if you do it locally, hey, you're the wheel. I mean, you got some possibilities here. We have a local newspaper that serves 3 small communities, and they're very, you know, Mount Angel is, there's a Catholic monastery So it just gives you an idea. Some of the cities are very conservative.
Right.
And they're going to do an interview with me.
Interesting.
Yeah, the atheist woman. and so that's going to be real interesting. I have been surprised at how many people I've met in this small town who are atheists.
Wow.
Yep. So there are a lot of people in the pews who are atheists too, but it's their community. They like the songs, they like the ritual, and it's easier to be there than leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And frankly, a lot of people don't they don't think about it that much, right? Like they don't care about the actual religion, you know.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, Greta Vosper, she just felt, she was a minister of a congregation and she became an atheist and she said, I've got to be straight with my congregation. Here's why. And I think we can continue by doing this. And some people left, but new people came in.
Yeah.
So she has a vibrant community around humanist issues.
Yep.
Well, isn't that what we should be focusing on anyway?
Yeah, that's right.
How to help our brothers and sisters. So it's going to be real interesting to see what happens up there with that particular issue and Greta.
Yeah, I've been sort of keeping an eye on it. When she was excommunicated or whatever they do with Protestants, I kind of was like, okay, so what's she going to do now? And then she just moved into a new building and was like, okay, this is still my community.
Well, in the United States, we have something called Sunday Assembly. Do you have that in Canada?
There might be some places like,
okay, but it's a way to kind of replicate some of that ritual, and address issues in the community or things people are interested in. They don't talk about religion. They wouldn't let me make a presentation, for example, right. But they have a lot of music and it brings people together. Music has been around for 50,000 years.
Yeah.
I can sing the first, not stanza, what's that called? The first verse of 1,000,000 hymns.
Right.
I can't do the second, but I remember the music. I remember the words and I'm surprised. But that affects us when we're young and it's in our brains and it felt good. So those feelings come back when you go to the Sunday assembly and get to have the ritual and maybe a little pomp and circumstance and music and getting to know other people and having potlucks together.
Right.
You just skip out the sermon.
Yeah, it seems like almost like the Unitarian type thing.
Yeah, they're pretty close to atheists. I'd call them almost agnostic.
Yeah, I know there are atheists who attend the Unitarian Church here.
Right.
So.
Well, and even, what did the Pope say lately? Oh, he got involved with climate change.
Oh, so, yeah.
Things are changing. Even if you look at the most conservative thing, which is, Islam or Catholicism, you see changes. Women have a right to drive in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They're a little behind, by the way, but,
Even though, they kind of went around trying to gather up all the activists who pushed for that.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, you already said you were going to do it, and now she drives and you got a problem.
Yeah.
But things change slowly.
Yeah, that's right. Culture changes. It just takes some time.
Exactly.
So, I guess I don't want to put you on too much of a spot here, and I'll cut this section if it touches on things you don't want to air. But I'm curious about your relationship with Wendy Marsman and what happened with her leaving the atheist movement.
Yeah, I don't know how much I want to say publicly.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I can talk about the beginning.
Sure.
She called me and said, I want to start a podcast. And I came up with Women Beyond Belief. And lo and behold, one of my friends said, there's a book called
Right.
Women Beyond Belief. And that was my first book, Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. And she says, I won't use that name for my podcast if you don't want to. I said, are you kidding? I said, go for it and we'll collaborate. And she interviewed me. I recorded some of my blogs for her.
Right.
So I was just reading them through, and she posted those, and I reposted them, the audio on my YouTube channel, and it was going very well. And then, and I'm not going to say the name here, but she got, well, and it would be names. She got really disappointed with some men in the atheist movement.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just like Mythcon, which is you shouldn't have invited this person. And if you're going to go, then you're supporting platforming this person. And as I said earlier, I would rather be somewhere where people had different views than I did than just sycophants. Everybody's saying the same thing. What's the fun in that? And she just got really disappointed with some people she'd met that she really respected, who didn't toe the line of the people saying it should be shut down. And it wasn't just, it wasn't Mythcon per se, but it was men in the atheist movement. And she just got real discouraged. And I think she pulled the plug entirely on the podcast, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I followed the show, like, it was always in my playlist, and occasionally I would get to it. So I did catch the last couple episodes where she was talking about leaving, and I remembered she had a relationship with you beforehand about, like, sharing the show and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I was curious how her leaving the movement sort of affected you, or how you saw it.
Well, it didn't affect me really personally at all. I mean, I never had any intention of doing a podcast, and I appreciate you're doing one. It's so much work. So much work. And that technical end of it, I can do my blog on WordPress, but I'm on Twitter, but we have some limits here when we're 68. Yeah. So it didn't affect me. I liked getting my stuff out in a different form. I liked reading the blogs and giving them to her.
Right.
So it was a loss of a venue. I think she had a really good voice. As I said, there's not a lot of women who are very incredibly active in the atheist movement, and she was adding to that. So I think it's a loss to the atheist movement. But I appreciated her perspective. She made this decision based on how she felt about it. And you kind of have to be okay about going forward. You have to be passionate about what you're doing. And, when your bubble gets burst, it's hard. And so I totally empathize with her. I think people are really quick to expect everyone, I don't know how to say this, kind of toe the line. Like I had one of my subscribers says, don't go to Mythcon. Don't talk to those people. And I thought, I'll talk to anybody. My husband, when we stand in line somewhere, stands a little off because I will engage conversation with anybody in line. They'll end up to be my new BFF.
Right.
So, and I like to talk to people who are interested in hearing a different point of view. But
I can understand that. I mean, I can't say that I do the same thing, but I can see where you're coming from, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And, I'd rather talk, have a presentation I do. It's on my YouTube channel called From Goddess to God, Elimination of the Feminine Divine. If I thought I could get in, I'd love to give that in churches.
Right. Yeah. I suppose.
But they probably say, no, I don't think so, Karen.
Yeah. They'd never let you
maybe the Unitarians would, but,
maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. But, I think that dialogue is really helpful, and it brings out other issues. And it's just like incel. I would be happy to talk to people who feel disadvantaged and say, look, I was in the same boat. I mean, I was 38 before I got married. I had thought about having a child alone and decided I couldn't do that personally. I had the income and the ability and all of that. But for me, and this is totally a personal decision, I don't object to anyone else having a different view, but I couldn't imagine looking in the child's eyes and saying, I don't know who your father is. I mean, I played that out, and I couldn't do that. And I got married and ended up at 40 having a son. And, he's the best thing in my life. But I had really said, I'll never go there.
Right.
So I don't know. I think that conversation with somebody who feels disadvantaged and, women are changing and nobody wants me and blah, blah, blah would be very helpful. You're not guaranteed anything. And what can you do? What can you do to improve your life and your passion? Focus on that and things will come. Yeah. Because if you're going to go around saying, poor me, let me tell you, it's written all over your face and people are going to see it. And that is not the path to success.
I mean, we kind of talked about this on the live show with the full crew, but there is something to be said for having compassion and empathy for people who are lonely. Sure. It's just when it gets to that toxic level, that's when you got to be like, okay, there's something else needs to be done here. Like maybe you in a particular, maybe you need to be in therapy, or maybe you need to be, maybe something else needs to happen.
Oh, I'm really glad you raised that, because one of the best things I did, I had a coworker. I had just broken up with somebody, and I had a coworker come into my office. I was in my 30s, and she said, "You were going to call this counselor and make an appointment. I am not leaving your office until you do so." And a coworker, I called a number, I made the appointment, and I cried for the first 2 sessions. Right. But it really helped me understand what was motivating me, what was I don't want to say doing wrong, but how my attitude was influencing things. And it really changed the relationships I had after that. I don't think I would have ever married my husband had I not gone through that process. Right.
Yeah, I've been off and on going to counselors since my divorce. Mm-hmm. And like when you have trouble, sometimes you're not in a position where you have the tools to deal with it.
Yeah, and you just can't see straight. I mean, and we have such a bad attitude toward mental health. Yeah. We have for so long said it's under your control. I mean, nobody would think you could go home and cure cancer on your own, right? Right. No, let's do chemotherapy. Let's do this. But if you are troubled mentally, it's okay to get help. I mean, it's a process just like anything else. It's not your fault. It's not something you can automatically fix. Think of it as a medical issue and what you would do if it was and it is a medical issue in a way, right. But we have this dichotomy between brain and body, and we see them separately, and we see the brain as something that I'm in charge of. Well, listen to a Sam Harris discussion on free will. That'll change your mind. Right. There's a lot more there that needs to be understood and help sought. Come on, reach out, talk about it with somebody, a professional who understands. That's totally okay. And if just one person who listened to this said, I'm going to go see a counselor, that would be super.
For sure.
Been there, done that. Excellent idea.
I agree. I think that's a good place to leave it. Where can people find stuff about you, and where can they get the book?
Okay. Women versus Religion, The Case Against Faith and for Freedom is online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's in some bookstores, but my publisher does that, and I have no idea which ones. It is also available in Kindle. That just came out about a week ago, so you can get Kindle or paperback. I'm not sure whether we're eventually going to do an audio, because particularly on like the ex-Muslim one, somebody would need a lot of work pronouncing all those words. Right. So I'm not sure if the publisher's going to do that or not, but definitely Kindle and paperback. And as I always say, if you like it, if you could put a review on Amazon, that would be terrific.
And what I will do is I will buy a copy for the first person who emails me saying they want one after this episode goes live.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you so much. And of course, I have a blog, www.faithlessfeminist.com. And if you go to YouTube and do Faithless Feminist, I have a couple presentations on it. Not something I put up a lot, but if you were interested in that, From Goddess to God, Elimination of the Feminine Divine, it was taped when I was in Tucson, Arizona, and it's up there and you can watch it.
Very cool. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Cory. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so that's the end of the interview. I'm not sure really what to say about it. I really appreciate Karen coming on with me. she's a great person to talk to, and I always have a lot of fun when she comes on the show. I think I disagree with her about whether or not going to Mythcon is worth the effort. I expect she'll have a great time because she can talk to anybody and she can engage with just about anybody. And I hope that her debate goes well. I don't think that I would do as well in that environment. I don't think that I would have fun, and I don't know if I would think it's worth it for me. But I hope it is worth it for her. I'm curious what listeners think. Do you think it's worth the effort? Will you spend the time educating people who have a history of engaging in bad faith the way Bogosian and Lindsay do? I don't know. Seems like an interesting question. Sometimes some people seem to think that we should spend our time educating these people as much as we can, and maybe we'll break through sometime. Other people think that's not worth the effort and that we never will gain any ground with them. So, I mean, I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm curious what listeners think. For closing, I guess I said in the interview that I will buy a copy of Women v. Religion for someone. So just email me at mail@brainstormblog.net and I will order you a copy. The first person who emails me. I'm doing this episode's work before the previous episode releases, so there's not much to say as far as feedback, but I want to give a big thanks to all our patrons, and especially our top patrons. Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, Daryl Goosen, Aaron Young, William Driver, and Positively Skeptical. If you want to get a special thank you in every episode, then you can become a patron at the $5 level or higher at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. I also want to thank whoever it was that bought one of our t-shirts. I am planning on getting more designs into the store as soon as I find time. And hopefully there'll be something that everybody wants. For everything else, you can check out the show notes at thebrainstormpodcast.com or our website, brainstormblog.net. I want to thank our financial supporters, Keith, Kim, Janet, Stephanie, Zach, the Utah Outcasts, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Bob, Glenn, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, Magnus, several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave, Positively Skeptical, Rob, Chris, and Larry. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Or you can go and buy some stuff at tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabbi for doing the intro voiceover. You can find his podcast out at voidpod.com. Thanks to Alex Capper Murdoch for doing the voiceover for our ads, and thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at aloststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel, any guests, or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Cory, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patreon and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interactions with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.